Good afternoon, FinStalk Sports Network. I'm FinStanza. Today is one of the more exciting days for me because my fellow Canadian, who I've been chatting with for a really long time, is sparing some of his important time now that the Miami Dolphins season is over, even though he's going to be quite occupied with the offseason. But I'm FinStanza. We're here. We're talking Dolphins. With me today is one of my actual people that I follow on a daily basis. So please check him out. I even want to say it the way you say it, Alan, on si.com/NFL/Dolphins, and the host of the All Dolphins podcast, Alain Poupart. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How you doing? And then got to give a hat tip to the hat that you're wearing.
Yeah, we always have to hat tip it. I had to ask you, though, before we talk Dolphins and we talk about everything that you've done for following the Dolphins for as long as you have been, even though you're still a spring chicken, who was your favorite Expo? I've always wanted to know who your favorite Expo growing up was.
Such a great question. I would probably narrow it down to Tim Raines.
Oh, there we go.
Such a blast to watch. Vladimir Guerrero in the later days. Larry Walker's another one who stands out. I was a big David Palmer fan.
Oh, I remember them.
He was a pitcher who had absolutely nasty stuff, except he blew out his elbow pretty early in his career. So those are the four guys who stand out.
Yeah, well, for me, even though I was still a little bit younger, that game in Shea Stadium when Tim Raines came back after that game he had in Shea Stadium was one of the most memorable highlight games I always go back to. It's absolutely incredible. No, and Guerrero, that arm, his son is never going to reach his talent, but what an arm he had from right field. Unbelievable. Yep. So, no, I really appreciate you taking the time. We'll to talk Dolphins. I know this season has been one of the more interesting ones I think you have probably covered in your time as a Dolphins writer and columnist. So I want to ask you, that's actually my first question. Has this been for you one of the most up and down seasons to cover? Like, has it been like where you just don't know, there's been so much to write about even throughout the season?
Yeah, but they had one like this not too long ago. If you remember 2021, Tua went on IR, and ironically enough, getting injured against Buffalo in week 2, except that year wasn't a concussion. It was a shot in the ribs by A.J. Epinesa. Then they sank 1-7, had issues winning with the backup. And the backup that year was Jacoby Brissett. But the 3 games he started were against 3 good teams, which were Indianapolis, Las Vegas, and Tampa Bay. And then they fell to 1-7, came all the way back 8-7, have a shot at the playoffs, came up short against Tennessee. And the one difference there, I guess, is that season finale in 2021 was meaningless, whereas this year it wasn't meaningless, although it became meaningless when Kansas City basically decided to bring their D squad to Denver to play for that last game. But there have been a few that were very eventful, and it's always, I prefer things like this than we had a string of 8-8, 9-7, 7-9 years where nothing really happened one way or the other, which is, guess it's fine because you're a contending team for a bit, but it's kind of boring. I mean, this year there was a lot to talk about with the 2 Tua injuries, the rally from 2-6 to put themselves in a position to have a shot at the playoffs. Ultimately, it fell through, and that's disappointing. But to answer your question, it was among the most eventful. I think probably the Bullygate year probably would take the cake as the most eventful year, but not in a good way that year.
I know. The only thing is we could have used some of that nastiness of Richie Incognito on the offensive line this year. We could have used it a little bit, right?
Yeah, but they operate an outside zone, though.
I know that's true, and he doesn't really fit that zone. That's why you could even see, and we'll get into it a little bit, where that's where the loss, I think, of Austin Jackson, I find, was where his athleticism on the outside zone was truly missed. That was just from my perspective. That was my. Do you find that, or not really? That losing Austin Jackson changed the way the running game sort of ran there on the right side.
Okay, here's the thing though. He left after the Buffalo loss was his last game.
That's true.
After that game, if my math is incorrect, and I'm not going to count the finale against the Jets because that game's tough. Because I'm sorry, but if you don't think Dolphin players are looking at that scoreboard and seeing very early on it's 7-0, it's 14-0, it's 21-0. So that one. But the other 2 losses without Austin Jackson in the lineup, regardless of what the running game looked like, were against Green Bay and against Houston. Are you really ready to say that having Austin Jackson in the lineup in either of those 2 games would have made the difference between a loss and a win?
No, not at all.
Same here.
Not at all. No, that's 100%. I know you've talked about it on your show, which everyone on this network follows. We really appreciate all the insights and all the knowledge that you have there. What were your overall takeaways from the press conference? Because just from a high level, we sort of talked about it on our network a little bit, that I was actually a little more impressed by a little more of the tone that Grier had. A little bit. Do we believe a lot of what he said? Maybe not, but a lot, because he has to protect himself with the backup QB stuff. But we found that he was sort of more a little firm, and that at one point, and I don't know if you find this when you're asking your questions, because I know sometimes I have to do it. I rewind to listen to McDaniel's answers. When you sometimes ask him a question, you might have to ask it. You might have to rewind or more than once to understand what he's trying to say. How did you find that press conference? That who were you a little more impressed by, and did you get some substantial feeling that they're actually going to apply what they're saying there into the offseason, especially with the whole fine thing that you talked with Dave Hyde about? Like, what your overall, or you think it was just like you weren't impressed at all?
It was kind of to be expected, and I've done those end of season press conferences now covered the Dolphins full time since 1989. So you do the math, it's more than 30 years. And those things are kind of the same. They said some things where you're like, yeah, that makes sense and all that. Like, for example, like a couple of them that come to mind, the issue with the fines. Where he said, well, now the expectation is going to be next year that everybody needs to be on time, from the start. It's an NFL team. That shouldn't have been the case in the first place. I mean, seriously, like, really. The other issue that he didn't address in this particular case is if you have habitual tardies from certain players, how do you address them? Because the CBA limits the amount of fines. Okay, so if they fine, and we don't know the culprits, I think we're probably not out of line if we suggest that Tyreek Hill might be one of them. Mm-hmm. The hell's a $2,000 fine or whatever it can be to him? Like, seriously. And then you do what? What, are you going to bench him? Then you're basically hurting the team to make an example out of him. Like, this is where it gets tricky. And then as far as Chris Grier is concerned, Chris Grier is like saying all the right things, but again, it's like, I'm going to tell Tua it's unacceptable for him to put himself in harm's way. What? Like you wouldn't have told him that before? I mean, like, again, and then the one explanation he gave, the offensive line, his explanation wasn't bad. When he was talking about, like, everybody is, excuse my language, pissing on the offensive line, he kind of like basically, like, in 2023, they were number 1 in the NFL total offense. They were number 1 in rushing average per carry, number 6 in total rushing. So it's not like, if the offensive line was that bad in 2023, how the hell did they manage to accomplish that?
Yeah.
But the problem was you relied on some guys, some of the guys who got hurt in 2024. Teron Armstead, Kendall Lamb, both in their 30s, and I'm not talking about just turning 30. Another one is Isaiah Wynn, who Chris Grier made the admission they were caught off guard by how long it took him to get back.
But do you believe that?
Sure. He would have no reason to say that. But then he's exposing himself to, it's your job. You should have known that or protected yourself against that. Yeah. And then the backup quarterback issue, I'll give him props for transparency. But then to me, that made it even worse when he's saying we didn't want to hurt our comp picks. That's why we didn't go higher. Well, I did a story on that yesterday on Miami Dolphins on SI.com. You'd have lost the fourth because of the offset thing. Christian Wilkins, and then the formula is very complicated. It's average salary per year, plus you tack on postseason accolades and then playing time to create the formula. Christian Wilkins, a $12 million average per year, 14 million. 29. What am I talking about? 28 million.
He
Sorry.
makes 28.5 million a year. I believe.
Correct. My bad. So 28. So the average per year is way up there. He's not getting the bump because of postseason accolades and playing time because he's been on IR since week 5. So now, according to overthecap.com, his comp pick goes from a 3 to a 4. So the offset would have been that one because the guys that got signed, whether it be Andy Dalton, Jimmy Garoppolo, Marcus Mariota, Joe Flacco, those types of guys wouldn't have had a salary to make it for a 3. So you're going to tell me you weren't willing to sacrifice a 4th-round compensatory pick to make sure you had a very good backup when your quarterback's injured more often than not? Yeesh, that was bad.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, maybe it wasn't at any point. I could have sworn, because I know the big talk that people have talked about is that everyone's a big fan of maybe Josh Dobbs maybe fitting well into the system. I can't remember if he was actually the number 2 or if he was the number 3 in San Francisco at the beginning of the year. I just did as an example. So, but if we're talking about the back,
but that's one guy. That's one guy who's in love with Josh Dobbs. It's not.
Yeah,
many guys.
No, I know. But let me ask you: do you think with the whole backup quarterback answer, if you would have had a Tyler Huntley, because I agree, and I know you've corrected it because people are on X don't like to mince your words, that his performance against the Browns was starter-like. He's not a starter; it was starter-like.
Correct.
If he would have been there at OTAs or during training camp, that would have given us, when Tua was out, that one extra win to make the playoffs. Do you think he would have changed had he been there prior to showing up in Game 3? Did he push the needle at all?
Yeah. And I always get a chuckle out of those who call him Pro Bowl quarterback when he was like about the 17th alternate, and he started the year he made the Pro Bowl. He started 4 games for Baltimore. So that's it. Tyler Huntley was not on an active roster at the start of the 2024 season. Does that tell you something? Yeah. He played great against Cleveland. He blew my mind because I never expected that from him because that's not who he's been in his career. He's a very, very erratic passer. And that game he happened to be on. And it wasn't just screen passes. He threw some balls on the field and he was really, really accurate. And against the Jets, particularly in the first half, it was butt ugly. So I don't know, maybe because the quarterbacking, and here's the other part of it too. If you look at the games they lost, at Seattle in week 3 was a tough assignment regardless, even if Tua starts. That's a tough assignment. It's a tough place to play. And Seattle came in 2-0, and the defense gave up a couple of big plays in the first quarter, actually, including 71 yards to DK Metcalf. So that's a tough ask. The game against Tennessee was dysfunctional from the start. That's the one that really could have made a difference. And you right off the bat, there's like a swing pass to Tyreek. He drops it, basically looks at the ball while Tennessee recovers it because it's a lateral. That and even though the Dolphins lost by 18 points, that was misleading because what Tennessee did, they lost Will Levis early, put in with an injury. They put Mason Rudolph's in there, and basically the coach told them, if you saw that game play, it was basically, don't turn the ball over. I don't care how many yards you gain, basically, because that offense over there, that's a Division II offense, not going to hurt us. So that's a game I think the Dolphins would have won with even reasonable offensive production / quarterbacking. And the game against Indy, it's really easy to point the finger at Huntley or the quarterback play, but he actually, if you're one of those who subscribe to the passer rating theory, and I do to a certain extent, I think it's overblown at times, but he was at 100 when he got injured. But this was a game where there were penalties up the wazoo all over the place, getting stuffed on 4th down, 2 fumbles one in the red zone and the other by Mostert that led to a Colts touchdown. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Alec Ingold getting stuffed at the Indy 16. So they left so many points on the field in that game that it's like, regardless of the quarterback play, they should have won that game. Is basically they did everything in their power to lose it, and they succeeded.
Yeah, no, I think we've come to the conclusion. We talked, myself, Bobby, who's the founder of the network, that in theory, you've even said it. You can win with Tua, but you can't win because of Tua, right? Tua can do the things you need, but you have to build things around him. He's not going to go out and dominate a game to the point where he's going to lead you to victory for half of your wins. Does he make the biggest difference? Does he change the way the offense works? Sure. but the team has to adjust in many ways. You had mentioned on your show, and I wasn't surprised either, that everyone came back. Would you have preferred? Are you comfortable that the fact that they came back, that everyone is back, or would you have preferred that one person left? I don't really believe in that half measure stuff. Or do you think that? And I think part of my theory of them both coming back is the fact that they, like you mentioned, they got extensions, but also I believe that all three are sort of tied together. That Tua, Grier, and McDaniel are sort of are linked together, and that if it doesn't go well next year, then all three would have to go, not just one or two or three. Like they're all linked together. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree with you. And my whole thing is where I would have taken a stance and expressed a strong opinion, like or don't like, is all those contracts they gave last offseason.
Yeah.
And I was kind of not shy about saying I thought they should have had Tua play on the 50-year option. To not tie yourself to a quarterback who, along with his nasty injury history, hasn't shown he can help the Dolphins compete against the big boys on a consistent basis. And that's not to say it's all on him, but if you're going to pay him that kind of money, then yeah, it becomes on him a lot more than it does on your right guard or whoever you want to bitch about. That's one of them. Tyreek Hill, zero idea why they felt the necessity to restructure his deal. They didn't extend him. They just restructured him, gave him more guaranteed money, moved money up front, a little bit more money. Why? Jalen Ramsey, who's a very good player, and it doesn't really apply here because he plays the other side of the ball, and I don't have as much of an issue with that one, but even though, again, he had 2 years left on his contract, and you had extended him after you acquired him from the Rams. Why? Mike McDaniel had 2 years left on his head coach contract. Why? It's not like you'd gone to the AFC Championship game and you were that close to the Super Bowl. So once that decision was made, at that point, it's like, okay, you've basically taken the dive off the cliff. Wait, let's go ahead and land in the water and see what happens there, and then blow it all up if need be later on down the road. But I don't know that it would have made sense. Like, again, and the other part of it too is every decision to me is, again, the key word with the Dolphin organization that comes from them, not me, is collaborative. So if the Dolphin fans were like pissed off at Chris Grier for the lack of a playoff win, it's not all him who's making the decisions. It's just flat out not.
From that's what I want to ask. Do you feel that a lot of people are saying, well, they put a lot of it on Chris Grier, but I know the talk has always been that Grier is very much, like you said, more of a yes man, in that sense that I believe a lot of the whole talk during the trade deadline that Mike McDaniel walked in and said, bang on the table, you're not trading Calais Campbell, when Chris Grier, who maybe, I guess he really felt comfortable that his job was safe, that he was really potentially trade a mid-round pick for Calais Campbell. Do you feel that Mike McDaniel has more of the personnel decision-making than people might think of what's on the field?
Well, yeah, the thing we don't know is if push comes to shove, if there's a disagreement between McDaniel and Chris Grier, who's got the final word? And technically it should be Chris Grier because he's the GM and Mike McDaniel's the head coach. But when you hear that story, and it's not anything that McDaniel, refuted, that he, in his words, I threw an adult temper tantrum because he didn't want to trade Campbell. And looking back, the offer became as high as, I believe it was a fourth or a third from the 49ers, yeah. This according to Campbell's brother, appearing on another podcast, who's now a comedian and who used to play some college football, actually spent some time maybe in the Arizona Cardinals training camp. And then Tua made it a point to say after he got his contract extension that McDaniel went to bat for him. So, but yeah, there's zero question Mike McDaniel has some personnel say. So this is why everybody who was like directing their anger at Chris Grier, I don't know that it's totally warranted.
Okay. So this is sort of a two-parter, but I'll mix it in just about McDaniel and the offensive system. So what is your overall feel about his leadership skills as a head coach? Do you consider himself, after 3 years, at the level of a head coach? do you feel that the play calling, because the play calling has changed over the course of the year, should be maybe handed off to Frank Smith and Darryl Bevel so he can focus on being actually a better head coach with more accountability and more of a disciplinarian? Because the reason I'm asking that is, and you've talked about it as well, we're not the only team that the defense plays two deep safeties. And why do you think that Mike McDaniel has not been able to overcome with that speed? And maybe something goes wrong with Tyreek Hill, because you've said he's fast, but he's not stupid fast anymore this year. So like I said, I pay attention to what you say. What's going on there with Mike McDaniel? Because at what point does he realize, because you got the media, you guys asked him the question, like, are you going to give up play calling? And he goes, only when I feel. But I feel like that was more of a knock to Frank Smith. What does Frank Smith actually do? So what are your overall thoughts on Mike McDaniel's leadership and how he's handling the offense? And what do you feel he should be doing in the 25 season?
Well, I'm not convinced that he's not the best play caller on the staff. And the notion of like he should focus more on being a leader, well, that takes place during the week. So on game day, I don't have a major issue with it. And when it comes to play calling, like he points out very well, when it works out great, everybody's patting him on the back. And if a play doesn't work out, then it's like, what the hell are you doing? Can't have it both ways. I mean, are there some plays that are bad? Yeah, absolutely. There were some plays that you scratch your head where it looked like the design's really, really bad. Like the 9-yard loss by, I think it was Jalen Wright against the Jets, where they have 8-chan in motion and he cuts up field before, and then Julian Hill's involved, and one of them or both of them cut up field before taking on the on-rushing outside linebacker, and boom, Jalen Wright's got the ball and he's got somebody on him immediately, obviously. But was that a bad play design, or was that poor execution where somebody, missed their assignment? Don't know. As far as him as a leader, here's the thing, and that was the question mark with Mike McDaniel when he was with the 49ers, and the talk was becoming him the head coach here. Because I spoke to my counterpart with the 49ers on SI.
Yeah.
Grant Cohn, who's never shy about expressing his opinion, if you know Grant.
Yeah.
And he was telling me that was a question mark with him, is he's super smart. In case you didn't know, he went to Yale. The question was whether he could command a room and be a leader. And I think that's still fair to question. And if you have an issue with guys being late all the time, it's certainly not giving you the answer you want. And I brought up Brian Flores on the podcast yesterday or 2 days ago. And of course I got yelled at, chastised and all that, because stop romanticizing Brian Flores' tenure. Say what you want about Brian Flores, is that kind of BS would not happen in the first place. Forget about it. He wouldn't stand for it. It wouldn't happen in the first place. Now, Brian Flores' way of dealing with people and players, probably a little extreme the other way. But there's possible to find a happy medium. No. So I think this year, in all aspects of the job, is going to be a referendum on Mike McDaniel.
Okay. Yeah, because you have said it. You take away the tank gear, Brian Flores, because that doesn't really count. We can't count that because they were signing players on Tuesday.
No, he won too much actually in 2019.
Yeah, he won too much.
His record, he won too much.
Yeah, but actually, his winning percentage in the last 2 years is better than McDaniel's in the 3 years, right? So overall, like you said, but when you were covering the Dolphins back then, do you find that there was more of an account? Was there a feeling of more accountability, and what was really the distinction in cultures? Did you feel like the first 3 years of the rebuild what was the real distinction? Is it because was it more of a party time now, and there it was more New England Patriots like where it was
Absolutely.
just yeah.
To me, the picture that encompasses, and we didn't see that as much this year, maybe because the record wasn't there, but the scene that encompasses or encapsulates the Dolphins under Mike McDaniel is the little dance when they were spanking the Denver Broncos.
Yeah,
that whole game kind of told you, okay, these are the Miami Dolphins. Under the right circumstances, they can be really, really explosive. They're going to have fun. Oh, look how much fun they are. They are such a fun team and all that. Yeah, where's the nitty gritty in that? And it was basically, it's a lot looser, more fun workplace than it was under Brian Flores, who it's all with Brian Flores is almost sir, yes, sir. And I mentioned like his motto that I've never forgotten because it stuck out to me was basically, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you're forgotten. And then the other thing was the TNT wall, TNT standing for takes no talent, at the old facility in Davie, where no matter where you were in relation to either of the two practice fields, if you made a mental mistake, either jump off side, false start, miss an assignment, whatever, your ass was jogging to that wall to tap it, just to remind yourself and to reinforce the notion of focus on the small details. And I looked yesterday, Dolphins were they were one of 6 teams with more than 140 penalties during the 2024 season.
Yeah.
And the only one of those teams that made the playoffs was the Baltimore Ravens, who of course have a 2-time MVP and maybe 3-time MVP Lamar Jackson.
How would you correct, because I didn't have this as one of my questions, but what would have been your strategy when you're watching them? Because I know it was one of the stats you probably follow most of the year on 3rd and 1, on 4th and 1, 4th and 1, 3rd and 2, 4th and 2. They were in the bottom 3 or 4, if not the worst, in those conversions. Is there with the option they have? Like, why is it such a problem for them to handle short yardage situation? Is it the personnel? Is it strictly the personnel in your mind?
Well, that's part of it. Number one is it's an offensive line that's built on mobility and athleticism more so than power and physicality. That's number one. Number two, they don't have the luxury of picking up cheap first downs like that, like so many teams do, those teams with a bigger quarterback, because you can't do that with Tua.
No. Number
three, for some reason, Mike McDaniel fell in love with Devon Achane in 2024. We didn't have Larry Little. No, correct. You didn't have Little. Ain't that the truth? But again, not many teams have had a Larry Little. I mean, the guy was like an all-time Hall of Famer. So that's all we need to say. Number three, like Mike McDaniel completely fell in love with Devon Achane, who to me is a great complementary running back, more so than a feature back. And I'm sure somebody's going to point at his stats, look like with 960 yards rushing, whatever, 500 receiving. That's not a lead back. And he's not a pound the rock kind of running back. He's just not built for that.
No. Yeah, we've had a difficult. Yeah.
Sorry, that's part of it too. And then why you're not using Jeff Wilson Jr., who is the most physical back you have. While he's not as physical as maybe ideal, he's the most physical back you have. So why wouldn't you use him on 3rd and 1? Beyond the fact, why in the hell did you cut Chris Brooks, particularly if you weren't going to use Jeff Wilson Jr.?
Yeah, absolutely. No, for me, I think the highlight for everybody this season was when they had the ball at the 1 yard line and they could not. I would have pounded I forget which game it was. Green Bay, where they couldn't pound it in 4 times. You give the ball to Jeff Wilson, give the ball to Raheem Mostert. They didn't try to pound. They tried it once. It just didn't work. And then they just started throwing the ball. It doesn't. And when they're trying to throw fades or trying to throw these kind of passes to your small receivers, it doesn't exactly work. Right? It's just not, they're ready for it. I think also the defense is ready. They know the Dolphins aren't going to run there. They just don't have the right back to do it. Were you surprised just to appease? I thought about fan appeasement, but maybe just overall appeasement. So it sort of takes the shade off of them. Were you surprised that they have yet to make any other coaching decisions? And I guess I'm sure you know which coach I'm about to go to. I got to give credit to Jason Sanders. I was hard on Jason Sanders last year when he was struggling over 50. This year he was money. We don't have 8 wins if it's not for Jason Sanders, right? Like we could maybe have 5 or 6 because he gave you points in almost every game that he performed in. How does, in your mind, Danny Crossman, at the level of the special teams that they've experienced with the penalties and the returns and how does he handle how does he keep his job from the perspective of that it's been in the bottom since McDaniel has come here?
Except what if I were to tell you he actually was good? The special teams were very good in the second half of the season. I remember Was it the Indianapolis games that was a complete nightmare, or was it the game at New England? They pulled out. There were some major special teams issues. The second half of the season,
I think it was the New England game.
No, but the second half of the season, Sanders kept making his kicks. Yeah. Malik Washington had a couple of really long kickoff returns, one in each of the Jets games. There was a really bad play against Green Bay when he muffed the punt. Is that on Danny Crossman? You don't think that Malik Washington is instructed? If you're fighting the ball, which we easily could see he was fighting the ball, get the hell away from it. So I don't know that there's cause to demand Crossman's head after this season nearly as much as there was after last year. After last year was like, why? Why? I don't get it. Why? So I'm thinking if he wasn't going to get replaced after last year, there's no way in hell he's getting replaced after this year because, again, the special teams were good down the stretch.
Okay. How would you rate has Weaver earned himself a head coaching position based on his performance with the level of the defense and how they played this year? Has he earned himself a head coaching job, do you think? Or do you feel like he's still would he be a big loss and could we replace him? And also, do you think he's earned the right after 1 year with this particular defense playing the team? I know we play who we play, but a lot of people will say, and everyone was saying, in the end, our level of schedule wasn't that great, but you play who you play. Do you feel like with the talent he's had, with the injuries, because everyone has injuries, that he's earned himself a head coaching job?
That's not for me to say. If I'm going to base it strictly on the job that he did this year, yeah, he did do a good job. Absolutely. Fourth in total defense, minus the two guys who are your stud pass rushers. Your best edge pass rusher was a rookie first-round pick who kind of got off to a slow start as expected, who's got some liabilities against the run, so you can't use him on a full-time basis. You got a starting safety who's on the final, if not on the final 9, on the final 3 holes of his NFL career, and very good in third down defense, red zone, points. They were in the top 10, I believe, I want to say. So, no, did a very good job, and didn't hear of any dysfunction whatsoever on the defense. Your team MVP comes from the defense. Not that it means anything, that it means ever so slightly, but in terms of dealing with the media and communicating what you would want the message of the organization to be, I think that guy's A+. So, yeah, and he was a hot head coaching candidate last year. He interviewed for 2 jobs, was a finalist for one of them, I believe. Nothing he did in Miami in 2024 would have diminished his start.
Okay, great. I'll just get you out of here with a couple more questions because I know you're quite busy. What do you think what are the key priorities, do you think, for the Dolphins? Because we probably see the draft is not until April, but you have the free agency where Chris Grier is quite active. What are your 3 top key priorities heading into free agency? And do you believe Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier can turn it around? And if they can't, do you feel they get a do you feel they get a leash for the entirety of next season? Or do you feel that if it starts off the way it did this year, at let's say an 0-4, similar to Joe Philbin, who got the vote of confidence from Ross back in 2014, do you see that both one of them could be gone like a quarter way through the season, and maybe if Weaver's still here, Weaver gets the job? Like, how do you see that playing out overall?
The only way that would be an issue is if they start off 1-4, 0-4, with Tua starting every game. If Tua gets hurt, then that's it's always what you're going to have to fall back on. Priority number 1: get a good backup quarterback. Because I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Tua is not going to play 17 games in 2025. He did in 2023, but that was the outlier. That's number 1. You're going to need a safety because I have a hard time seeing Javon Holland coming back next season. He's a free agent, and he is chasing the bag. And I don't know that the Dolphins are going to go that high in terms of what they're going to offer him because they're already over the cap with, I think, it's 37 players under contract for next year. They can't justify giving it. Although they certainly could structure it to where his first year number wouldn't be that big. I don't see them spending that kind of money for safety for a guy who just doesn't impact the game quite enough. I know some of the analytics site love him. Personally, I mean, he's okay. I don't think he's nearly good enough for the Dolphins to pay him that kind of money. So they're going to have to replace him, and then Jordan Poyer on the other side. My guess he's going to have a hard time finding a team offer him a contract. So that could be the end for him. So that leaves the Dolphins with 2 vacant starting safety spots. So that's obviously a major priority. I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to say the offensive line. So I'll go ahead and say the offensive line, the interior. My guess is probably, I don't know what's going to happen with Teron Armstead. Are they're going to shake him down to take another pay cut after they did last year? Does he want to come back? We're going to rely on him again and go through that whole same spiel. If he does come back, you're kind of set with your 2 tackles and your center. You could use an upgrade at guard, particularly since Robert Jones and Liam Eichenberg are pending UFAs, and I don't see a great urgency or need to re-sign either of them.
Okay, great. So my last question for you is, do they hold on to their first round pick, or if they do, what would be your number 1 priority at 13? And also, would you draft a quarterback in the mid rounds and potentially cut Skyler to have 4 quarterbacks if they're going to pick up another one? Or do you actually see them that they see the writing on the wall? Oh my God, Max Crosby's available, that they actually might sacrifice that first round pick? Or do you think, no question, they're holding on to that first round pick? And if you were to hold on to that first round pick, what is your number 1 go-to position so early in the draft?
See, it's interesting because when you first started asking the question, I was like, there's no way in hell they're trading the first round pick because they need to build up a supply of young players, you know. But then I'm thinking, I stopped myself and thinking, wait a second. If this is a last shot for Grier and McDaniel, it behooves them to do whatever is necessary. So then I could see, yeah, maybe. If the right opportunity comes along, yeah, I could see them trading the first round pick. I would think the likelihood is still less than 50-50 because who knows, maybe, I mean, Chris Grier might have a contract for life for all we know. Because again, he's been around since 2000. So, Drew Rosenhaus says on Pat McAfee show that Tyreek Hill is coming to the Dolphins. Sorry if I'm reading your.
No, you can't. By the way, just FYI, the Bobby Finstock, the guy who does all these wonderful graphics, the guy who puts together all the hard work of this network, who's created this network, who's built up this network, is this gentleman right here. So okay,
and by the way, this is as I wrote in my analysis of the whole Tyreek situation the other on the night it happened, is like. Not shocking in the least that it was frustration talking. Besides, it's not like the Dolphins haven't taken care of him at every single solitary turn. I mean, he got, and I'm sorry if I'm
free, whatever you want. You're free reign here.
No, it's like, yeah, I'm talking about McDaniel earlier throwing an adult temper tantrum. That was not an adult temper tantrum. I mean, dude, you didn't make the playoffs for the first time in 10 years. Oh my God, the calamity. Seriously? He wasn't like, what, was he pissed off because he wasn't enough part of the offense? Still led the team in targets. So, yeah, I get that. That was frustrating. It was the end of the year sucked, especially that day when you go to the stadium hoping you're going to have a shot. And like I said, you look at the scoreboard and every 2 seconds, it's another Denver touchdown. I get it, but seriously. And then Tyreek again. I'm not exactly revealing state secrets when I would say he's maybe not the most mature person in the world. So the fact that he would vent like that was not exactly surprising. But then what was worse is he hadn't cooled off the next day because then he puts that avatar of his face on top of the Antonio Brown when he walked off the field, literally in the middle of a game, walked out on the Buccaneers. That was like, dude, you haven't like cooled down. And anyway, but then he reverted back to the Dolphin thing. So,
and also no matter with all his legal troubles and everything that he's going through with the whole stuff where the Dolphins backed him up with the police department and everything. No, what team is going to want to engage with him. Like they're only adding more of a headache. And like as you mentioned, to take on that money at that contract, as you've always said this year, something's up. He's not the same. The 30-year-old, 29 going to 30 Tyreek Hill is not the same as the 30 going to 31 Tyreek Hill. He's not the same player.
No, but sorry to cut you off. But what I would say though is I wouldn't write him off just yet because like I've said all along, he had a lot of different things going on physically, and then maybe he has a good off season where he recuperates, and next year he's going to be back to a lot more 2023 Tyreek Hill than 2024 Tyreek Hill. So, so back to the first round pick question. It's got to be an impact player. If there's a safety out there, and I keep seeing the name Malachi Starks
ball hawk
mentioned. Okay, I have no issue with that. It would be nice if the Dolphins had that kind of player. I'm not a huge fan of spending a 13th overall pick on a guard unless you're going to bring me Quentin Nelson or Zach Martin.
Yeah,
I mean, like a complete guy's going to completely change your offensive line. So I would steer clear from that. And if you look at the other position, they certainly could use another stud defensive tackle, even if Calais Campbell does come back for another season with the Dolphins. And that's two major ifs if he wants to play again. And if he doesn't get a better offer somewhere else that presents maybe a better shot at winning the Super Bowl, that would be another possibility. As well as Tyrell Dodson played at linebacker after he came over from Seattle and could team up with Jordan Brooks. If there's a Roquan Smith, Bobby Wagner type out there, and I haven't done my draft research yet, if there's that kind of player out there, I would love that. I've been jonesing for an impact inside linebacker for a long time. Jordan Brooks this year probably had the best season to me for an off-the-ball linebacker by the Dolphins, probably since 2016.
That man can hit. Whew.
Yeah. Yeah, in coverage, it's shaky at times. But
we never had a great coverage linebacker. He's better than Duke Riley. So look at anyone but Duke Riley in coverage, right?
No, Duke Riley is a backup special teams.
No, but whenever they put him out there and they target him, they know he's there.
Yeah, but dude, again, he's a backup for a reason.
I know.
And you know what? He's still more reliable than Channing Tindall, who by the way,
let me ask you that. Yeah, that's a quick question. What was it with the fact that couldn't they have kept? I understand the whole issue maybe with David Long, but couldn't you have afforded to keep David Long even if you stripped him of his captaincy, if you felt or sit him, and then cut Channing Tindall? What exactly was the preference at that time in the season? If you may have had injuries with Walker and such, to not hold on to David Long, and it's not necessarily had cap issues and potentially, and then just cut Channing Tindall. What would have been the difference? Like, couldn't they have held on to David Long, or am I wrong?
No, they could have, but A, they decided Tindall's helping us on special teams, A, and B, if you notice, David Long's not on a 53 right now anywhere. I mean, he was playing like, and I don't know if he had an accumulation of leg injuries that stripped him of his mobility, but it was bad. I remember like watching him in a joint practice in Tampa Bay in the backer on backs, like pass coverage drill, understanding that those are heavily skewed toward the offense. So it's not fair to like rag on somebody if you get beat. Like if you ever see they got beat on a one-on-one drill, roll your eyes because that's the way it's supposed to be. But there's degrees. The way he was getting beat, like it wasn't even close. It was like, oh my Lord. And then you saw this early in the regular season. I mean, David Long was a problem.
Yeah.
So there's no nefarious reason why Channing Tindall's our draft pick from 3 years ago. We have to keep him, otherwise it's going to make us look bad. And that pick's already looked bad, and I don't think there's any salvaging it.
No, but I guess that a lot of the Dolphin fans, I'm sure you've even talked to them, I think the reason why Liam Eichenberg continues to be rotated in with Isaiah Wynn when Isaiah Wynn people thought maybe was doing a better job at guard was because they traded up two picks, just 2-round picks just for him, like the performance there. Personally, for me, I just think the one thing about that whole offensive line, and before I let you go, and I'll just ask one final question, is that a lot of the times when they draft these offensive line players, they don't know what specifically they were meant to play. Like first, Austin Jackson was supposed to be the left tackle. Then Liam Eichenberg at one point was supposed to be tackle. Like Aaron Brewer originally was a was a guard that they put as the smallest center. He did a great job this year. When they got Connor Williams, he was one of the best guards in the league, and you turned him into a center. Liam Eichenberg has played every position on the offensive line, and you didn't draft him to do that. So a lot of what I think has happened with the offensive line is that they've yet to draft a player and actually put him in the place that they originally had planned for him. That's also been something I've noticed, that there's no adjustment to what the person played in college to work versus what they play in the NFL. They're always trying them out at different positions and not putting them in the position where they might best succeed at the onset.
Well, the only problem is, because Austin Jackson did get a look at left tackle, and it was bad. It was so bad that they were like, "Oh no, he's got to move." So I'm not sure that, and I buy your premise. And the thing is, generally speaking, you can play the offensive line. You should be able to play more than one position. And to your point, Patrick Paul stayed at left tackle. They used him at right tackle when they had to. When they had to against the Jets the last game, and when they had to, or I think it was against Green Bay, had to come in for some plays.
Yeah. No. By the way, the number one comments on the chat today, if I hear Aaron Rodgers' name one more time, it's I honestly, everyone thinks, oh, just go get Aaron Rodgers to back up Tua. Number one, he's never coming here. Number two, are you really going to utilize his 2 games against the Dolphins this year as your basis for giving him another year? I don't really.
And in what universe does anyone think that Aaron Rodgers would accept a backup job?
Exactly.
He's going to retire before he goes to.
Yeah, he needs 100% starting. And honestly, he in theory, the Jets went all in, but Joe Douglas and that group there, they won more games with Zach Wilson than they did with Aaron Rodgers. It's all relative, right? The man literally constructed his own team this year, and it was a failure. Why would you want to do that to your team here? Honestly, we're just a year behind, right? This year could have been the year had they listened to you and taken Tua on the 5th-year option, didn't extend Tyreek Hill. Honestly, if the Dolphins let me ask you that, if the Dolphins would have had the season they did, and they didn't extend Tua, and they didn't extend Tyreek, would it have been more likely with the season they had that McDaniel and Grier could have been gone a year earlier?
Yeah, well, it definitely would have been more likely, because then you ask yourself, had they done that, now what would you do with Tua now? If Tua is an unrestricted free agent in March, you're not signing him to the 5-year, $200 million deal with the void years, obviously. What are you signing him? What are you giving him, and what is he accepting? Is he accepting a Baker Mayfield type of deal? You putting the franchise tag on him? I don't know. And Tyreek, they didn't extend Tyreek again. They just guaranteed his money. They could have walked away.
Yeah, they could have walked away.
They could have walked away after this offseason, taken some sort of a cap hit, but not a gigantic cap hit. Now they can't. So that would have been, they would have had an opportunity to blow the whole thing up.
Okay.
It would have been more likely, because once they made the move to guarantee that money, restructure Tyreek, sign to the long-term deal, then they would it was a sign that we're going all in with this group, this foundation, and we're going to give it. While they didn't say that, essentially, it wasn't like they're going to go 1 year, it's a bad year. Okay, we're going to blow the whole thing up.
For me, the draft, if I had a choice, if there's a big body wide receiver that could help Tua with 50-50 balls and just another power. I know they have Jonnu Smith and they have Tyreek Hill, but Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have tendency to get injured. They get off on 3rd down. Because one thing I always said, that when Tyreek and Jalen Waddle were running these go routes and they come off the field when it was 3rd down, I'm going, because they're gassed. I understand they should go out there, but a lot of times they're running and they're I'm tired, I'm going to go off the field. That's a lot of the discipline. But I'd love for this team, the last time they've had a really big body wide receiver who could make those 50-50 catches, those fades, they haven't had one in a very long time. So if there's a premier wide receiver there, we need a 3rd wide receiver. I think Malik Washington is going to grow into it. At one point he could be something, but I don't think he's good. You can't have 3 little guys, 3 little wide receivers as your top 3 next year. That won't lead to anything great next year, I don't think.
Chase Claypool, there's your guy.
Chase Claypool, yeah, that worked out well. So, Alan, I really appreciate your time. I know the off season is for you, but what are your focusing on between now and, I know February gets a little quiet, so tell everyone where they can find you and what you're going to be focusing your work on over the next 2 months before free agency.
I can't pin it down because it's going to be everything and anything. You name it, I'll be all over it. There's content, fresh content, free on the website. No paywall. Every single solitary day. You see the website there. It's Miami Dolphins on SI. Just slap on a .com, Miami Dolphins on SI.com. The podcast is going to be on a regular basis throughout the offseason, certainly as news warrants. And that's the All Dolphins podcast, which you can catch on YouTube.
Amazing. 447, 48. What are you?
447 we've done.
Pretty amazing. It's congratulations. You've done a wonderful job to build that network in a year. So almost a year and a half. So it's pretty good. Good for you. So guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check Alan. Honestly, if you really want your Dolphins content, you really want to know what's going on, all the ins and outs, you won't find any better reader than this man. He's a great Montrealer, a great football guy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us on the network today.
Of course. My pleasure.
Fins up, everybody. Have a great day.